Chairman Fox. Thank you to the witnesses. As policymakers here, I see our obligation as one to make sure that all children have access to a high-quality education that includes great schools, great teachers, great administrators. That includes all students, particularly traditionally underserved students, students with disabilities, English language learners. They should all have that access. I see this as a moral issue, but also as a civil rights obligation. Now, I worked on this issue when I was a state legislator as well as a member of Congress, and I have to say that I'm, in general, skeptical about charter schools because they are not addressing the underlying issue of equity of opportunity for all. Mr. Clark, thank you for your testimony and raising some of those important concerns about the lack of stability of many charter schools, especially in Michigan. I wish we were having a robust discussion about how great magnet schools have been in the districts that have them, where we have a level playing field, where we have an elected school board, where the schools are not opening and closing based on the management and creating that instability. But we're here today, and so I want to focus on and talk about online charter schools, many of which are for profit. Although certainly online classes can expand educational opportunities for students, especially in rural areas, online schools typically require a learning coach, for example, often a parent, making families who don't have at least one stay-at-home parent out of the loop. They have to monitor students during the day, and in fact, in my home state of Oregon, less than half of the students who attend online charter schools graduated on time, and that's 30 points behind the state average. In 2015, the Center for Research on Education Outcomes at Stanford led a report examining the performance of online charter schools in 17 states, including Oregon. They found that online charter schools have an overwhelmingly negative effect on student achievement. On average, they lost 180 days of learning in math and 72 days of learning in reading. One researcher concluded losing 180 days of learning in math is, quote, literally as if the kid did not go to school for an entire year. Indiana has had, we were just talking about Indiana, they had Indiana Virtual School that graduated a lower percentage of students than almost every other high school in the state. I want to ask you, Mr. Clark, as a taxpayer and a parent, what do you think about these online charter schools? And what would you want to know if you were considering enrolling your student in your child in an online charter school?
The first thing I would be concerned with is there a system set up to hold them accountable for the services that they say they're going to provide for my children? I'm not, and I want to say this, I'm not here to bash charter schools, but I'm here to push the fact that accountability is the key.
Absolutely, and I want to get another couple questions, and I agree, accountability is really important. That's something I worked on in the state level. Ms. Rees, I wanted to first ask you, there's something that you submitted in your testimony where you said that millions of American families are now settling for schools that are less than what they want for their children, and far too many of these students are stuck in schools so dreadful that members of this committee would not accept them as adequate for their own children or grandchildren. And your suggestion in that testimony is that if only there were a charter school, members of Congress or other involved parents would take their children and put them in a nearby charter school. As policymakers, we have to ask the question, what about those schools? How can we address the needs of all of those students who are stuck in what you are calling our schools so dreadful? Our responsibility isn't just to the students whose involved parents put them in a charter school. We have to consider all of those students. And it's the same question I asked Secretary DeVos. Why aren't we asking, why don't those schools have better teachers? Do they need better administrators? Do they need more classes? Do they have lead in the water? It's not just our responsibility to the kids who go out to another school. In your testimony, Ms. Rees, you applauded the work of charter schools, but seemed to ignore some of the problems of the for-profit and online. You probably heard about Ohio's electronic classroom of tomorrow. They abruptly closed last winter. The school was inflating student outcomes without any evidence that students were learning. An audit, they received about $19 million more from the state than they should have received. and $590 million in federal, state, and local funds, and then abruptly closed and left those students with nowhere to go. Shouldn't there be stronger oversight to make sure these schools are actually serving students rather than focusing on churning profits? And why are you encouraging removing caps and having more access to funding when so many cases like this exist? And Madam Chair, can I introduce into the record, how long will we let them fail? Indiana committee begins review of virtual charter school rules.
Without objection.